If you ask anyone, the death sentence is a certain end of the road for any convict. Yet somehow these 5 condemned criminals stared death in the face and lived to tell the story. From the electric chair to a firing squad and 8 doses of lethal injection, to say that these convicts cheated death is an understatement. Here are 5 unbelievable ways convicts survived death row. Ramel Broom. Ramel Broom, a convicted felon who came out of a lethal injection-style execution alive. Though mostly non-violent, Ramel started his life of crime at a juvenile age. By the time he was 18, as if right on cue, he took to more violent acts, starting with an armed carjacking in October 1974. By the time he was 26, he had become a monster. Ramel was convicted of armed robbery and raping a 12-year-old girl babysitting his niece. After spending 9 years in jail, you'd think Ramel had ample time to rethink his choices and turn his life around, but it only got worse. He showed repeated criminal patterns of kidnapping, rape, and aggravated assault, up until karma caught up with him one fateful day. On a snowy December in 1987, he tried to snatch an 11-year-old girl, but the icy road made it difficult for him to make a clean getaway. Passerbys got a hold of his plate number, and he was arrested later that day. Ramel was found guilty of numerous charges, including aggravated murder, and sentenced to death. On the day scheduled for his execution, everything was set for his lethal injection procedure except for one small problem. The executioners couldn't find a vein to administer the deadly drug. A room full of prison doctors jabbed away at Ramel more than 18 times in an attempt to find an IV line. One staff tried to sink a needle in his ankle and it struck his bone. In short, a procedure that was not supposed to last longer than 10 minutes turned into 2 hours of agonizing pain for Ramel. After the executioners got tired of trying, the then Ohio governor postponed the execution by 1 week. While the cruelness of the failed execution attempt on Ramel sparked public sympathy, Ramel's lawyers tried their best to challenge the re-execution by making multiple appeals to the Ohio Supreme Court, arguing that the state's actions towards Ramel were cruel and unusual punishment and would violate double jeopardy protections under the 5th and 14th Amendments of the U.S. Constitution. Despite pressure from the public and Ramel's lawyers, the Ohio Supreme Court waived Ramel's appeal and scheduled his execution for the 17th of June, 2020. However, his execution was delayed to March 16th, 2022. As fate would have it, Ramel cheated out of his execution again by dying of COVID-19 on the 28th of December, 2022. Willie Francis. While the innocence of this character is debatable, you may want to grab a tissue for this story because the case of Willie Francis is an extremely evocative one of a teen victim of racial injustice. Francis was falsely accused of murder. In 1994, he worked for a Louisiana pharmacist who was shot and killed. The murder case went cold after 9 months without evidence until they found Willie somewhere in Texas. They arrested him on suspicion of trafficking drugs simply because he was carrying a suitcase and had a stutter. They later claimed Willie had Thomas's wallet on him but didn't present any proof. As the investigation unfolded, no real incriminating evidence was found on Willie. Yet, in the absence of any real evidence to prove Willie guilty, the cops used every trick in the book to pin him for the murder. They started by making Willie utterly defenseless. He had no legal counsel during the interrogation. Even when he stood trial, the defenses appointed to him by the court neither offered objections nor called up any witnesses. It was also speculated that Willie was coerced to make a false confession. Willie initially confessed to stealing the murder weapon used to kill the pharmacist from a police officer and gave some names connected to the murder. However, the cops swept all that information under the rug and stuck with another vague and conflicting confession Willie made, which reads, "It was a secret between me and him." He was quickly found guilty by 12 white jurors and sentenced to death by the judge at the age of 15. 2 years later, on the 3rd of May 1946, Willie was scheduled to die by electrocution, but thanks to the sloppiness of one prison guard, he lived to see another day and tell the story. Mid-execution, 17-year-old Willie screamed in pain, take it off, I'm not dying!" It turns out that a drunken security guard didn't set up the electric chair properly, so though it delivered awful volts of electricity to Willie's body, it wasn't enough to kill him. When asked what it felt like, Willie said it was like 1,000 pins stung his skin while he felt his hands flutter at his sides and his left leg went dead. Bertrand Deblanc, an attorney who sympathized with Willie, tried to appeal against his re-execution to the Supreme Court, but they declined. When that didn't work out, he attempted to overturn the conviction on Willie by presenting loopholes in the trial. Willie's reaction to the attorney fighting for his life will shock you more than the electric chair he endured. Willie had already made peace with his death and urged Bertrand to stop pursuing the case. A few days before his execution, Willie told the press he was going to meet the Lord with his Sunday pants and Sunday heart. 1 year after the botched execution, Willie Francis was re-electrocuted and pronounced dead by noon. This is one of those sad situations where you truly believe the convict didn't deserve to die. But as you'll see in our next case, injustice doesn't always prevail against true innocence. Anne Green. Anne Green was another falsely accused person condemned to death by hanging. She lived in difficult times for a woman, and being a housemaid only worsened her situation. Anne got knocked up by the house owner's stepson and kept the pregnancy. The child ended up being a stillborn, so she tried to hide the baby's body so nobody knew about it. Unfortunately, they found the body and accused her of infanticide. She was violently hanged to death, but when the doctors brought her down from the ropes and checked her vitals, they found the impossible. Anna had a pulse. She was still alive. In the following weeks, Anna responded well to treatments and fully recovered from the botched execution. The judge took Anne's recovery as a sign of her innocence and declared that she won't be re-executed. After surviving the hanging, Anne's life completely turned around. She got married and had a lovely family. Joseph Samuel. As much as I'd like to believe hanging isn't the most efficient way to execute someone, the botched execution in the story of Joseph Samuel has divine intervention written all over it. Convicted of robbery, Joseph was exiled to Sydney Cove, a remote facility somewhere in the wilderness of the colony of New South Australia, built to isolate convicted criminals from the rest of the world. At that time, they didn't have the maximum security prisons we see in the 21st century. It was believed that prisoners who tried to escape would meet certain death in the wild. But Joseph and a band of prisoners dared to roll the dice, risking their lives in a dangerous gamble for freedom. In the end, the wager paid off. The fearless crew made it out of the desert alive. However, this won't be the last time Joseph evades inevitable death. Once they reached town, their first line of action was robbing a rich woman's home. During the operation, they killed a police officer that was guarding it. The house owner reported the incident to the police, who found and arrested the perpetrators. Due to lack of evidence, they had to let the other culprits go, but since the woman recognized Joseph, he was sentenced to death by hanging. At that time, the standard drop hanging method, which kills the condemned instantaneously, hadn't been invented yet. Strangulation was the known method for killing a convict by hanging. On the day of Joseph's execution, he and other condemned convicts were lined up at the gallows, prepped with 5 cords of hemp rope. While the executioners saw dead men, little did they know that one man was going to walk away from his ropes with his life. After the executioners rolled away the carts underneath them, the ropes strangled the life out of the other criminals. But Joseph's rope snapped, releasing him to the ground. He landed on his feet and sprained his ankle in the process. Mind you, 5 cords of hemp rope can hold up to 450 kilograms of weight. That's more than enough to suspend a human body. Yet somehow, when they quickly prepared another noose, Joseph snapped loose again. The crowd stirred up as they motioned for Joseph to be freed. When the hangman tried to hang Joseph again, the 3rd time, and he broke free from the rope, the crowd went completely nuts. Whether you call it luck, divine intervention, or fate, one thing for sure is that Joseph Samuel wasn't meant to die that day. A nearby policeman, observing the chaos on horseback, ordered them to suspend the execution while he summoned the governor. On inspecting the scene, the governor and other officers present agreed that the failed execution attempt was a sign from God that Joseph didn't deserve to die. Joseph Samuel's sentence was changed from a death sentence to life imprisonment. Ali Reza. The only thing more shocking than surviving death row is coming back to life after a successful execution. A convicted drug smuggler, who was sentenced to death by hanging, didn't just survive the execution, he returned to life after being clinically pronounced dead. If you're not familiar with Iran's strict drug trafficking laws, you may think of the death sentence as a harsh punishment in comparison to the severity of the crime. But Iran doesn't take drug trafficking lightly. Smuggling cases are handled by a special court system called the Islamic Revolutionary Act. This court system gives judges the power to give capital punishment to persons caught in possession of a specified amount of narcotics. There's no way anybody in their right mind would risk a possible death sentence by smuggling an incriminating amount of narcotics to this same country. Meet Ali Reza. the daredevil who was caught smuggling crystal meth into Iran in October 2013. He was convicted of drug trafficking and sentenced to death by hanging. Unfortunately, the hangman terribly botched the execution, leaving Ali Reza hanging on the rope for 12 minutes. Mind you, modern hanging methods, if carried out correctly, should snap the condemned's neck as they drop, killing them instantly. Even the earlier methods of hanging, which were based on strangling the condemned, should last only 5 minutes. Ali Reza's body was subsequently transported to the morgue, where his family was called to collect it. When they arrived, a nurse went to fetch the body on request, and what she discovered was straight out of a nightmare. She saw condensation around the plastic wrapping the body. Ali Reza was still alive. He was immediately transported to the hospital. At first, the Iranian authorities ordered Ali Reza to be sent back to the gallows once he recovered. However, the Iran justice minister didn't support the decision. He said going ahead with a second execution attempt would have negative repercussions for Iran's image. He waived the re-execution, and Ali Reza was allowed to keep the second life he was given.